there any questions, I will read them out loud. Okay.
Yep, perfect.
Cool. Yeah, so we are going live now. Yeah, so we should be live. Hello, everyone in the Cloud Study Network and outside of the community. Everyone is welcome to join our today's webinar with Avinash. Avinash, hi. How are you doing?
Hey,
Very well.
hey, Ken. All good.
Nice. Yeah, Avinash, amazing topic. Everyone is excited. Go ahead, introduce yourself. Tell a little bit about yourself, about your expertise in the topic and in general, in this domain, and tell us about the topic you want to present today. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Avinash, and I work as a DevOps engineer at Deloitte. And I'm also an Angel Like ambassador, and I frequently contribute to cloud native open source projects. And maybe that's about it. Maybe there are a few. I'm indulged in a few other things, but then I'm not going to go on about it. So that's about myself. And yeah, today I'm going to be talking about Cubescape. So it is an open source tool to secure your Kubernetes cluster. There are different ways of doing it, so I'll go all about it during this webinar. All right. So that's about the introduction. So Karen,
Awesome. Yeah, very cool. So let's jump right in, right?
sure, yeah, definitely. I'll share my screen and then we can get started.
Okay.
All right. I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah.
All right. So I
Yeah, we
welcome
can see
everyone.
your screen. Yeah.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. And I have absolutely no slides prepared. So I'm just going to go. It's going to be completely hands-on, and I'm just going to walk you through the tool and then how you can use it. There are different aspects to it, so I'm going to walk you through all of that. So there's absolutely no slides involved. It is completely from an engineer, uh, and there's no slides involved at all. All right. So the first thing is, let's look at the Cubescape repository, right? So that it's an open source tool, like I mentioned. So it is used to secure your Kubernetes clusters. And if you look at it, the first thing is you'll notice that it has a CLI, and there are two ways of securing it, securing your clusters with Kubescape. One is using the CLI, and another using installing Kubescape inside your cluster using Helm. So we're going to start with the CLI. I already have it installed, of course, but the installation is pretty straightforward. This is for Linux, and then for Windows and Mac OS as well, it's pretty straightforward. For Mac OS, there's homebrew support, and for Windows, I believe there's pretty standard tool as well.
Yeah, Avinash, sorry for a quick interruption. Can you increase your font on the screen?
Sure. My bad.
Yeah, that's
All
much
right.
better. Thanks a lot.
All right. So yeah, for Windows, it's also a straightforward process. You just copy these two commands and run them. You'll have Cubescape installed, and for Mac OS as well, you can install it using Homebrew. So that's about the installation. I'm just going to go over the installation in Linux one more time. I believe I might have an outdated version, so this will help me update it. So it's just one command. You pipe it to bin bash, and then the script does the magic for you. All right, so we have Cubescape installed now. I'm just going to verify the version of it. Cubescape version. Probably need to. Yeah, so I'm on version 2.0.150. Just clear my screen. All right, so we have Cubescape installed. So like I mentioned, there are two ways of doing it. One is using the CLI, and another using the help chart. So I'm going to walk you through doing it with the CLI first. And even with the CLI, there are two things that you can scan. One is your actual manifest files, or one is your actual cluster, and the other is the manifest file and the Helm charts. I'll start with the manifest files. All right, so I have the microservices demo, the repository from Google Cloud. So we're going to use this. It has a bunch of Kubernetes manifest files over here. So we're going to use this and scan and find if there are any vulnerabilities in this. So first thing is I'm going to clone that. Should have probably done this earlier, but then we clone that and then use the CLI to scan it. Just check, take a couple of seconds. Right, so we have it cloned. Microservices demo, and inside the microservices demo directory, there's the Kubernetes manifest. So if I look at it, it's a bunch of Kubernetes YAML. So if you're not, if I hope you're familiar with Kubernetes and then how you define your workload on Kubernetes. It is through YAMLs. There are the deployments, and then each deployment can consist of multiple pods, and then each pod has multiple one or more containers in it, right? So and there are other components as well. There's the service. Um, there are maybe the network policies. There are a lot more. So Cubescape can scan all of these manifests and then provide you what is, if anything is misconfigured or if there are security vulnerabilities associated with it. All of it is provided by Cubescape. So I'll just show you one of the files just to see how Kubernetes manifest file looks like. So there's the API version, kind, deployment. So this is a deployment YAML file, and it is a regular Kubernetes manifest file, right? So it has the pod definition, and yeah, and also the service is also in the same file. So we're going to with Kubescape, you can scan either a single file or scan the entire directory. I will scan the entire directory. Kubescape scan, and then and even with sorry, probably need to exit Discord. Sorry about that. All right. So even with scanning using the CLI, there is a Cubescape SaaS product. That's the software as a service product. So it is the it has a UI that you can use to visualize all your vulnerabilities or whatever the results of the scan. You can either view it in the terminal or view it in the UI. So if you want to view it in the UI, we'll use this dash submit flag, but I'll first show it in the terminal, and then we'll submit it to the UI and then see how we can use the UI to filter things and then do a lot more with the UI. All right, so Cubescape scan, and then the next thing it expects is the files. So we're going to scan all of it in the current directory. So I'm going to use the wildcard and then start wildcard.yaml. So it will, I believe all of them end with YAML and not YAML. Yeah, it is YA. Yeah, it is YAML and not YAML. Right. So it is scanning uh, all the manifest files in the current directory. So if you look at the output, maybe the output is a little jagged because of the zoom, but I'll just zoom out for a second just so that it makes sense, right? So now there's the control name and then the number of failed resources, excluded resources, all resources, and then the percentage of risk score. So the cool thing about Cubescape is it also provides you the percentage of the risk score, and it also scans each maybe control. Each control is basically one entity that you want to scan. That is, whether the cluster has access to Kubernetes dashboard. So that is one control, and whether your whether there is automatic mapping of a service account. So that is one control. Similarly, each control is all controls are grouped into frameworks. There are four major frameworks, but we can also create our own frameworks. I'll go through that as well in the future. I'll zoom back in so that it's visible. So the first is the control name, and then the number of failed resources. So in the cluster, there might be multiple namespace and multiple pods, right? So the number of resources that are failing this particular control is also shown, and also the excluded resources. You can also exclude certain resources that you don't want to scan. For example, it might be a known issue that with the default pods that come with Kubernetes, there might be some issues with that, and then it's out of your control, and you don't want to scan that. So you can exclude that. We'll look into how you can exclude that as well. And the next part is all the resources. So the total number of resources that it scanned. Let me zoom out again to see more data. And there's the risk score percentage. So it shows the percentage of the risk. You can set certain thresholds and then say if the risk percentage is above this threshold, I want to fail the scan. And you can also integrate this Cubescape scan with various CI/CD. There's GitHub Actions. There's an official GitHub Actions that's going to be released pretty soon, but I can show you all a sneak peek soon. Um, Maybe later I can show you all a sneak peek of it, the official GitHub Actions. And there are multiple other CI/CD integrations that you can do. Since it's just a single binary, you can may install it in your CI/CD pipeline and then scan against your manifest files. And while scanning it in your CI/CD, you can set a certain threshold and say if the risk score is above this, I want to fail my pipeline. You can do that using the Cubescape dash dash fail threshold flag. So let's look at the list of all flags. But before that, we'll actually look a little more about into the results, right? So the results are there's a long list of results. So it's scanning against each control, and then for each control that it scans, there's obviously the description that is printed out here. So what exactly is scanning against, and what exactly it is looking for. But there's also a hyperlink associated with it that show gets you to the doc, and there's a complete information about each of those controls. So what framework it is associated with. So like I mentioned, there are multiple frameworks. You can group controls into multiple frameworks. You can also create your own frameworks. The four major frameworks are the four major frameworks that come by default are the NSA, I think CI SA, if I'm not wrong, and the Armobest. Armo is the company behind Cubescape. Completely forgot to mention that. So they're the ones who've created the project. So Armo Security is the company behind Cubescape. So they have created the Cubescape project, but it is completely open source. The CLI and the help charts are all of that is open source, but the SaaS product or the UI that we'll look into later is not open source, but it's completely free to use. So not really an issue. All right, so let's get back to looking at the control. This is a random control that I've picked up, and then it shows the framework that it's associated with it, and the severity. So each control has a certain severity, so you can decide whether you want to maybe exclude this control, or um, depending on what action you want to take, you can look at the severity and then the description. There's also some related resources that it scans, and what exactly this control tests, right? And there's also the remediation. So not just showing you what's wrong, it also shows you how you can fix it. And there's an example of what you can use to fix it, right? So this is one cool thing about it. Let's look at further. Let's further look into some of the results. So while scanning certain things, it also shows the failed resources. So these deployments failed this particular control. So it's forbidden container registries. If you look at it, I think it is saying that the images needs to be from a specific control registry. We can also customize the control. So we'll look into that as well in the future. Um, so it's actually looking for certain registries. If it is not from that, if the image is not from the list of trusted registries, it will fail this. It will fail this control. So this is really important in maybe compliance. So you want all images from a certain registry, and then maybe one of the developers use a different registry. You can catch that in your CI/CD pipeline, or whenever you're running the scan, you can catch that using this. There's a whole list of controls that are defined. There's 87 controls, and there's obviously more being added as more CVEs are being discovered. Uh, let's get back to the terminal and then look at the fail threshold that I was talking about. So there's the fail threshold flag. It accepts what percentage, you know, above which the command fails. So by default, it is 100, meaning it will not exactly fail the command if there is any issues, but recommended is to set it to 0. So if there's any issue at all, it will fail the execution, and then if you're using it in a CI/CD pipeline, you can uh, fail your pipeline. And there is the account flag. So this is used to send the results to uh, the Cubescape UI. So the Cubescape UI, you'll need to create an account and log into that. Although a completely free product, so you can go ahead and create an account in the UI. And for that, for the authentication, you can provide it provides a unique UID for each account. You can provide that using the account flag. uh, by default, it reads the configuration from the configuration file inside in the local machine. So I think it's somewhere at uh, in my home directory, or somewhere at Cubescape config config.json. So this is my account ID. uh, so it reads by default, it reads from that file, but then if you want to send it to a different account, you can do that as well. So the exceptions is also another important flag. So if you want certain controls or certain frameworks to be excluded from your scan, you can do that using the exceptions flag, and you need to define your own exception configuration. If time permits, I can show that as well. I can go over creating your own um, custom exception file. So it's a JSON file that we will define to list all the controls that you want to exclude from your scan, right? There are a few other ones, but we're interested in the dash dash submit flag. And a few other important ones are maybe the output flag. So how you want to output the results, right? By default, it outputs in this format. There's the uh, list of all resources, and then a list of all controls it scanned. But you can customize that as well. And can So it is the output file. So if you want to write it to a file, you can write it to a file using the output flag. And there is the format. So how do you want to format the output? So JUnit, this it supports JUnit, JSON, and PDF as well, Prometheus. So if you want to send the results to Prometheus, you can do that as well. So different output formats that are supported. Of course, this is completely open source. So if you have a suggestion for a different format, you can create an issue in the repository, and then maybe the team will look into it. All right. So the submit flag, come back to the submit flag. So this is used to submit the results to the UI. Uh, I'll actually run another scan and then submit it to the UI, or maybe instead of submitting the results to UI, since there are other ways to submit the results to UI, I'll move on, and then we'll scan the actual cluster. So now if I scan the cluster, oh, sorry, my bad, completely, sorry. So you can only submit the results to the UI for a cluster scan and not for the configuration scan. So if you're scanning manifest files or Helm charts, you cannot submit the results to UI. So you can only submit the results to UI if you're scanning a cluster. So it's the same command for scanning a cluster or uh, scanning the manifest file. So while scanning the manifest file, you provide the path of the file that you want to scan. While scanning the cluster, you don't provide that. Just Cubescape scan, and then it looks for the default context in the current shell that I'm in. So it is. So I already have a cluster on GKE. It's CSN Kubescape demo. So it is going to look for that current context using kubectl, and then use that current cluster to scan for the results. And I'm also submitting it to the UI. So using the dash dash submit. Since I did not specify the path for the YAML, it is actually scanning the cluster and not the YAML files. So it is scanning the cluster. Oh, that was quick. Um, Scroll up and then look at the results. They should be pretty much. I have an empty cluster, so this is all the default issues that come with the cluster. So there might be a few things that you think you don't want to scan. You can exclude that as well. I get to that. So there's a long list of controls, which is good. So it's scanning against a lot of things. So if we come back, not sure. So it is scanning the current context of current cluster that uh, is in my local machine with this current context. And once again, the output is very similar to what we got with the manifest file. It prints the result for each control, and then the list of all failed resources, and then the link to the control. So you can go, and there are a few irrelevant ones. So some might be not relevant for the particular cluster, or particular maybe it's does not have the particular resource. All of that contribute to the control being irrelevant. So it mentions that as well. And there are a few failed ones. So there's no cluster internal networking because this is a completely plain cluster that I just created. So it's obviously complaining about that. There's no liveness probe because there's no data that and there's no workload in the cluster. But for all of these default um, resources that are in the cluster, it has no liveness probe. That's why this control has failed. So there are 17 resources that have failed, but three of them did have liveness probe configured, so it has passed. All right, so I think this is enough about the CLI. So let's get into the UI and see how
Mhm.
you know
Okay,
uh,
Avinash, before we
do that.
go into the
Sure.
UI topic, can we address? We have so far three questions from
Okay.
our members, and I posted them all into the chat. If you can check them out, would be great. The
Sure.
first question is from Madsen. It reads as,
Probably
"Can I
waiting.
install it in one place and then use it against another clusters?"
Yes, you can do that. So the CLI is a single binary, right? You can install this binary in one place and then use it against different manifest file, different clusters. So it will look for the current cluster in your that is configured with your kubectl. So you can switch the context with your kubectl and then run kubescape scan, and then it will scan that particular cluster. But there are other ways of scanning clusters. That is, you can actually install the Cubescape. You can actually install Cubescape inside the cluster. So that way you'll need to do it for each cluster. But if you're using the CLI, you can do it, install it once and then run it against any cluster.
Okay, great. And the second question is by Aresi. Is it possible to export this scan to my Prometheus?
Yes, it is possible. So like I mentioned, the one of the output formats for the Cubescape scan is Prometheus. So you can get the output format in the Prometheus format and then export it to Prometheus. Although I haven't really tried it, but I'm pretty sure it's possible.
Okay, great. And the third question is again from Medicine. Can I make an output with an HTML?
I don't believe HTML is supported, but there's the PDF option. But I think if HTML is something you're looking for, go ahead and open an issue on the GitHub repository. That is armosec
I'm,
slash
I mean,
Keepscape.
in CLI, probably it will not make much sense to have a HTML output.
Yes.
This
I mean,
tabular
if you're
yeah.
integrating it with your CI/CD pipeline, and then you want the results to be in an HTML format, if that's something you're looking for, go ahead and create an issue over here. Is what I would suggest.
Okay, I think we are done so far with the questions. As of now, we can continue with the UI topic, right?
Great. All right. So the UI is not really open source, but it is completely free to use. So it's at portal.armo.cloud. I believe I'm already logged in, but let me just open an incognito tab to show you all the sign up process. It's straightforward, just like with any SaaS product. There are different auth providers. There's the Google, GitHub, the Microsoft, or you can directly go ahead and sign up with your email. It's a straightforward process. So I've already logged in and I already have a few clusters that I've scanned. But let's look at the one that I just scanned, right? I just send the results to UI using the dash dash submit flag. So all of them begin with the same name because all of them are Google Cloud clusters. But then if I hover over them, I can see the name. And I'm checking for one that I just scanned. Yeah, this is the one. So I think it orders by the recent one. So this is the one. CSN Keepscape demo is the one that I just scanned. And here the first thing that we'll notice is the score for individual frameworks. Like I mentioned, all controls are grouped into certain frameworks, and there you can also create your own framework. That is through the UI. You can create your own framework. And the next thing is the score over time. So this is the graph of how your cluster is doing over time. So each time you scan your cluster, it will plot the score. I mentioned that there is a risk score associated with each framework, right? So it will plot that value, and then each time you scan it, it will show you a time series graph of how your cluster is doing. So ideally, the graph should be going down. So that's one way to view it. And the next is all the actual results. So there is a list of all controls that are that it scanned for. And also you can filter it by what status the control IDs. There are over 87 controls, and then you can filter it over the IDs that you're looking for, or any of these fields by severity. And each time you scan, it will show you, the previous results. That is, previously there were zero issues with this cluster, because this is the first time that I scanned this cluster. But next time I scan it, it will show me, the change in the number of resources that got fixed with that, with the new scan. So right now there are 17 resources that are being affected by this particular control. So next time, if I fix it for a few resources, for a few pods maybe, and then scan it once again, this number will decrease, and then the arrow will obviously it'll be a green one, and then it will be going down. uh, Once I install it in a cluster using help, I'll also show you how. I'll also fix an issue, and then we'll look at how this looks like, and also the remediation for each of them. Obviously, you can go to the docs and then look at the remediation. Sorry, but also it is easily available over here. And another thing is, you can also manually trigger the scan once again through the UI. So this is about viewing the results for a scan. So I did the scan using the CLI, but more interesting things come into picture when I install Cubescape into the cluster, because that has more visibility into the cluster, and then there's a lot more that we can do with it. So this is and also you can export the exceptions. This is also common for both scanning it with the CLI, or scanning it within the cluster. So the exception is, you define certain things that you don't want to look out for. Maybe exec into container. I'll open this, and then say you don't want it to looking for the looking into the role cluster admin. You can add it to the list of exception, or maybe the subject system masters. So this is how you define the list of exceptions. And then once you define the exception, you can export the exception. It'll come as a JSON file, I believe. Yep, it comes as a JSON file, and then you can provide that JSON file while you're scanning it once again using the CLI. So if I go back to the CLI, I believe there's the exceptions flag. So you pass that JSON file that you just downloaded while scanning it once again, or you can define your own custom exception. There's also I think there's some good docs around it. Not sure where exactly it is, but yeah, I can find that and then send the link later. But you can. This is how exceptions work. Let's install Cubescape into a cluster, and then we'll see more magic into it. So I have an empty cluster, so there's obviously nothing in it. Cubescape, yeah. I'm sorry if my mechanical keyboard is getting a little annoying. Let me just. There's nothing in the default namespace. It's just the ones that come by default with the cluster. These are the ones that come by default with the Google Cloud Cluster. So there's nothing that I've installed. So let's get into the docs. So the docs is at, you can also navigate to the docs through the UI. So I'm going to do that. And another wonderful thing is, if you see this video icon, it has a host of videos that they've created explaining each thing in detail. So if I miss something over here, go back to this video collection, and then there's each feature completely explained in this set of videos. So I highly recommend going through that if you're interested in further exploring it. Right? Oh, let me zoom this in. Oh, forgot about that. Yep. Right. So installing Cubescape, this is obviously the CLI. Let's look at installation of Cubescape in cluster. Right, this is the part we're interested in. Make sure we have a Cubescape account. We have that. If you don't, it's a straightforward process. Go ahead and do that. And we'll need installation access. Obviously, I have the kubectl access to that, and I have kubectl. So we check all the prerequisites. And the installation is through Helm. I already have added Helm to my local machine, and then also updated the repo. but these two commands will just add a Helm, the Armosec Helm chart into your local machine and then update the repo. We can, and we'll need the customer GUID. So each account in the UI has a GUID associated with it, right? I can view that with this command. Since I've already done scans earlier with this machine, so there's already an account ID associated and stored in my local machine. But if you're doing it for the first time, there'll be no data. So if you're doing it for the first time, I'd recommend going to the actual UI, and it has a better ways of doing it. So if you go to add cluster over here under configuration scanning and in cluster deployment, the here the first two steps are the same. That is adding the Helm repo and then updating it. And the last step is it will automatically add the customer UID in the command, and then we can use this one. Right, so I'm going to run this. And final part, I'm just going to edit the cluster name. By default, it will look for the cluster name for the current context, but I'll name it a little different so that not all of my clusters begin with GKE infra and the project ID. So I'm going to customize that a little and then provide a different cluster name. So CSN Cubescape demo. So the release R mode does not exist in my cluster, so it's installing it right now. Let's give it a couple of minutes for it to install. In the meanwhile, let's see if that is done. So the next part of the agenda is mostly dependent on the cluster, but I can show you all creating a customizing the control, right? I spoke about how you can customize your control and also customize your framework. Let's look at customizing a control first. So if you go back to the docs, there's obviously the list of all controls. So this is the docs hub.armo.cloud. I'm inside the docs, and here there are configuration parameters. So there are a list of controls that can be customized, although it is not really clear, what control that we are customizing. If you look at this parameter, it's not really clear as to what control we are customizing, but that is something that needs to be updated. Obviously community suggestions are also welcome. If you look at this particular one, image repository allow list. So this defines the list of all allowed repositories from where the image can be used. So if I go to I just clicked on settings over here in the UI, and then it took me to portal.armo.cloud/settings general clusters, and over here I click on posture and then controls. Yeah, so there are 71 clusters over controls over here. Here I'll search for the one that I'm interested, image. So images from registry. So this is the one that I'm interested in. So if I click on this, and now I can customize the control, right, for my account. Zoom in a little more. So I've expanded this particular control, and then it has a short description about what the control is. And here I can add other registries that I want to allow added to the allow list. Maybe I want to add docker hub dot. It's not actually docker hub. It's docker.io. So I can add this maybe, or if I want, I can remove any of the existing one or remove the ones that I've added. So this is how we can customize the control. There are obviously other ones that you can customize. If you look at the list of all, there's that. If you look at the list of all configuration parameters, I believe there are more controls that you can customize. But if you look at all of these, you can customize your control as well. So this is once again specific to the UI, but in the CLI, if you're maybe scanning your manifest file, this customized control will obviously not apply over there because this is associated with the UI. All right, let's look at if the installation is done. The installation is done. We have Armo installed or Cubescape installed in our cluster. Let's verify with use an alias now. Once you start using an alias, there's really no going back with kubectl. Right. So now I have the alias set up. So now I'm going to check the Armo system, I believe is the repository name or the namespace name. Sorry. So there are a few things that are deployed for the inside the cluster by Armo or Cubescape. So I think everything is running, and then there's one evicted pod, but I hope that should not be an issue. Uh, let's get back to the UI. So we have Cubescape installed inside our cluster. I'll zoom out a little. Believe this should be visible. Let me know if it isn't. I just hit refresh so that the new cluster shows up. Yes, the CSN Cubescape demo is the new cluster that I just added. So there's just one scan that occurs, and with once you've installed it inside the cluster, you can also schedule when you want to run the scans and what frameworks that you want to run the scan against. So this is a standard cron syntax that you can do. There's also decent explanation about setting the cron tab. So you can set the cron tab and then have a schedule on when you want to run the uh, scans, right? And obviously you can run it manually using the scan button over here. But I'll run it manually once I fix one of these issues, right? But right now the cluster is really empty, right? All of these issues are with the issues in the cluster. So I'll quickly deploy something. Go back. So I have a really small application. This is a single application. It has a deployment and a service. It's all it has. Right. So there's the deployment and there's the service. So I'm going to deploy. I'm going to apply only these two. Um, First, I'll apply the deployment. It should create the deployment in the default namespace, right? So it is creating the two pods. And next thing is I'll apply the service. Right? Okay, it is creating. Let's just give it a couple of minutes for it to create. We can maybe look at the service. We have the service ready. It's just a cluster IP service. Now, with pods. Okay, the pods are running. Great. So now we have a simple deployment and a service in our cluster, and the rest of it is from Armo or the things that come by default with GCP or Google Cloud. So I'll hit scan now. Scan against everything right now. Since I have new resources deployed, I just scan it and then see if there are any issues with the ones that I've deployed, and then I'll fix one of the issues, and then we'll see how how we can know that that particular issue was fixed using Keepscape. So this once again to reiterate one wonderful tool to maintain compliance, maintain your security posture for your Kubernetes cluster. So there are a lot of things that it scans against, and if there is a new CVE that is released, for example the Argo CD that was recently an issue. Immediately the next day there was control for it, and then you could scan it using Cubescape. So this tool comes in really handy for that. All right.
Avinash, what is actually CVE stands for?
To be honest, I'm not really sure, but all I know is it is the vulnerability. It defines the vulnerability. Let's look that up. Right? CVE.
Okay.
Common vulnerabilities and exploits, right?
Okay.
So it is a standard issue or a vulnerability that is published. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it's published in metadata.org maybe. So it is published so that users are aware about the issue, and then they can
Mhm.
go ahead and fix it. So these are some of the standard vulnerabilities that are published.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
it's usually published, I guess, on a regular basis, and
yes,
it contains like a chunk of vulnerabilities just in one release, right?
yes.
Okay, okay, got it. Thanks.
So as soon as CVE is published or released, Cubescape, the team at Cubescape, they usually come up with the control, and then you can immediately scan and see if your cluster is being affected by that particular series. So I think the scan was successful, since there is a time series graph that we see, uh, and there's not really much change in the risk score, because uh, we didn't really fix anything, right? We probably added more things, but did not really affect the overall score. Let's filter by the failed ones, right, and try to fix one of these. Mm. Right, I'm looking for the pods in default namespace. So I had deployed the resource, all my pods in the default namespace on purpose, so that I can go ahead and fix this. So if I go to the docs where it explains, so it is generally not recommended to run pods in the default namespace. So it is just a check for that. It is asking to maybe update the namespace um, in the metadata. So I'll go ahead and first delete the existing pods, so that I can move it to a different namespace. I'll delete the service as well, and uh, next edit the deployment. Change. I've commented the namespace, but now I'll uncomment it, and then same with service as well. Uh, it is pointing to the pod. All of them have to be the same namespace. I will go ahead and apply these two changes, the deployment and okay. There's no namespace that I'm looking for. So create namespace. Okay. Right, we have the namespace created. We'll go ahead and deploy the deployment, and then also deploy the service. Right. So we have nothing in the default namespace. If I look at, since I deleted the previous deployment, there's nothing in the default namespace. But if I look at the kubegen namespace, that the one that I just created, so it is run. The workload is now running in a different namespace other than the default namespace. I'll once again go ahead and scan it. Scan for everything, and scan now. So if I go to the scan, it will also show you when it is expecting to do the next scan. And also you can set the schedule. I went over that. So while it is scanning in the backend, I think it's pretty quick. But then in the meanwhile, let us look at the image scanning. So this is also once again a unique feature when you install Keepscape inside the cluster, and you'll only be able to view the results in the UI. There are a bunch of clusters that I already have, but let's look at the cluster, filter it down by the current cluster we're looking at, the CSN Cubescape demo. So it scans all the images involved in the cluster. So there's obviously a bunch of default workload that is present in the cluster by GKE. So each of them have their own image. So it is scanning all of those images and scanning the images that I have used with my deployment, and producing this report. So there are 26 high vulnerability, 26 images with high vulnerabilities, or it's not really 26 images with high vulnerabilities. It is 26 vulnerabilities with all the images that are present in the cluster. Same with 161 vulnerabilities that are ranked medium. And once again, there's a time series graph. There's only one scan that was done. I can manually go ahead and scan once again if I fix any issue with the images, and then scan it once again. It will show me a time series graph of how the the cluster is faring. So the 161 medium vulnerabilities. So if I fix any of those, it should ideally be going down. So here once again, there is the list of all the results, and there's the status. There's not really a filter for the status, but you can sort it. So the red meaning it has failed, or there are critical issues with it, and when it was last scanned, and the cluster, since I've already filtered it at a global level over here, the all the clusters should be the same, and the namespace where the image is, and what workload, that is what deployment, or if you just have a pod, what pod, and the container name, and what registry it is usually captured for a few ones. See, for the armo images, it is captured the registry as well, and the image tag. So this is the most important one. So what images it are these vulnerabilities found in? So I believe I might be looking at it wrong. So red means that there are no issues, green means there are issues. Right, so, yeah. So the green ones have issues associated with it. So there are 13 high ones, and then 12 are fixed. I believe it means fixable. So that if there are remediations, have fixes, right? You can filter based on that. So out of the 26 26 vulnerabilities with high priority, high severity, 24 of them are fixable, right? And all of these don't necessarily mean the image that you're using. For example, if you have a node-based application, so the current workload that I'm running is a node-based application, right? So it is internally using other base images. So it is scanning all of those. I believe it is using Anchor's image scanning tool uh, underneath. So behind the scenes, is using Anchor's, if I'm not wrong. Not really sure about that, but I believe it is Anchor, doing the scans. And Cubescape is providing an excellent UI and how you can, look at it and how you can fix it as well. I believe that there might be fixes for it. If you look at it, yes. So there's a description, whether there's a fix available, the severity, and then CVE, right? It is published. The CVE is published. So if you look at the CVE, and you'll be able to find remediations for this online. Right? So there's complete details about the CVE. Let's get back to the cluster scan. Right? The scan should have been done ages ago. Now let's look at I believe the ID was C30, if I'm not wrong. Let me search for it. 30. Yep, 30. Okay, that is the ingress. My bad. Or I think there's a global search that I can do with the control name. Okay, select all, control name, pod, and default namespace. Yes, let's look at it. So now earlier this was one. That is, we had one resource that had pods in the default namespace, and it is right now 0. Previous it was 1, right? And now it is green arrow. That is meaning it has gone down, right? Uh, so that's how you can know that you've fixed your issues, right? If I open this up, I think there's a way to open this up somehow. Not sure what I'm missing. But anyways, if you open this up, you can view, the previous results and the current results. Maybe it's due to the filtering that we're not able to open it up. Uh, Probably a bug, or I'm looking at it wrong. Could be enough. All right. Okay, might be looking at it wrong. I don't exactly remember where we can open up configurable control. Okay, this shows that it is this particular control is configurable. Like, or another way is to go to the settings and then configure the control. And the final thing is, let's look at creating our own frameworks, right? So if we go to settings once again, under posture, there's the framework. Here also you can set the schedule for your clusters. So right now there's just one active cluster. So if you look at all the clusters that were in my UI, none of them are active. Either I've deleted the cluster, or they were just submitted through the CLI. So they're not really active. So this is the only cluster that is active. This is the only cluster where I actually have Cubescape running inside my cluster, right? So I can set a schedule for it either over here, or individually at the cluster level. I can open the cluster and then set it like we seen, right? Let's go to frameworks. So creating our own framework. So let's say there are a bunch of controls that we want to regularly scan against. We can create our own framework, a custom framework. Name it anything. This is the name of the framework, right? You can name limit anything, and then also provide a description. Okay, there are certain restrictions on how you can name the framework. That is because it is parsed in the CLI as well and a lot of other places, so there are obvious restrictions. And we can select the controls that we want. Right. I'll just add a few and then create apply. And now we have our own framework that is created. I can open it up and then see the controls that I've added, and I'll obviously edit it once again if I want to add more or delete the existing one. So the reason why you would create a cluster custom framework is if you look at the results, you can filter it by the um, filter it by the framework. And also if you're scanning it in the CLI, there's the dash dash framework flag. So that is or is it a flag or subcommand? Cubescape scan, it's a subcommand, I believe. So Cubescape scan, and then the uh, framework keyword, and then the framework that we want to scan against. So I'll scan against DevOps best. I'll not really submit the results, but it will just scan against the DevOps best framework. So right now, it is just scanning against the DevOps best. So if we create our own frameworks, we can use that frameworks over here and then scan it against that particular framework, right? So you can also manually specify each control that we want to scan against, but ideally grouping them as a framework is a better idea, is what I think. All right. And the final thing is the RBAC visualizer. So I'm not going to completely go into this because I don't really have any roles defined in my cluster, all of that. So, but the RBAC visualizer, so Kubernetes has a concept of RBAC. That is, you can define who has access to what and who can do what on what resource. The who can either be a user or another system resource, right? So maybe one controller can do changes on another resource, or a user can do changes on a resource. So all of that is defined using RBAC policies. So okay, I'm in the correct right cluster. So with this, you can only look at one cluster at a time. Obviously, if you're looking at roles from multiple clusters at the same time, it will not make sense. So let me zoom in. And this has a complete visualizer on how you can look at the different roles, right? So this particular role, the GCP control manager, so all of these are default roles. Since I don't really have any custom roles defined in my cluster, all of these are default ones that come with either the Cubescape helm chart or with the Kubernetes cluster from Google Cloud. So the system user, GCP control manager, or that system role has access to the endpoints. So each resource is marked in purple, and then this is the user, and this is bound to this particular role using this binding. So in Kubernetes, you have the user, the role, and then the role binding, and then the actual user. So you need to bind a user with a role using the role binding. So even that is visualized over here. If you have, you can obviously do look at the you know RBAC policies with kubectl, but that will get complicated very quickly. So this is an excellent tool for looking at the what is happening in your cluster with respect to RBAC. And this looking at RBAC, I don't knowing, being aware of the cluster RBAC is also extremely important from a compliance point of view, and also from a security point of view, right? There's also a lot of other things that we can do with this UI. So you can say who can perform what. So maybe uh, who can delete and who can delete pods, so you can filter that out, right? So these roles can delete this resource, that is pods. And these users have uh, have a role binding to these roles, which has access to deleting these pods. So, and if there were other users as well, maybe I created a few custom users if I had, or those who show up here as well. So that way you can identify who has access to what, and then make sure you provide only minimal access to whoever needs the access. And there are better ways of visualizing it. So this shows it in a very uh, defined layout. uh, just to investigate, maybe just look at the roles, right? Look at all the roles, and then also with the filter that applied. So this is all the other roles that are present. If I zoom in, so there's the other roles that are present, but only these roles are the ones that have access to deleting the resource, that is spot. So this is a quick overview of RBAC. I'm not really going to get into that. Also, we're close with the time. Uh, and the final thing is the GitHub Actions, right? I mentioned, there's going to be an official GitHub Actions coming up. So I worked on the Cubescape GitHub Action that is going to be released officially uh, by Cubescape pretty soon. So it is very, I would say it's very easy to use because I developed it, but it's a very standard GitHub action. There are a lot of examples that I've tried to document, and internally it just uses the Cubescape CLI and then scans against the YAML files that are provided, right? Um, and there are different arguments that you can provide with it. So all of these arguments are from the Cubescape CLI. So let's say you want to scan against a particular framework, you can provide that as well during the CLI, during the CI/CD pipeline. Also, say specific controls that we want to scan. Both frameworks and controls cannot be specified at the same time because makes really low sense that you want certain group of controls and certain controls. It makes sense to use a framework, right? And also specify the threshold on what we want to on when we want to fail based on the risk score. Some other arguments, that is how we want to output, how what where we want to output it, all of that. uh, yeah, this is about the quick overview of the GitHub action, since we're uh, almost at the top of the hour. So just a quick overview of the GitHub Actions. All right, I believe I've covered most of the features of Cubescape. There might be a few that I've missed. I'd highly recommend going through the video gallery. And there was a recent release as well. They did a lot of changes, improvements. So all of that is also documented in the video gallery. So I
Mhm.
recommend going through that, and also the docs. So there are places where the docs is not really written, maybe something that you don't understand. So if we there are links to the videos that explain how to do it. So that's really helpful, right?
That's really great. I actually like how it cross references to the CLI and also to the UI or SaaS version. There is a cross reference between docs and back and forth, what is really amazing. And this videos is like really very helpful, I guess. Yet to discover further the Cubescape, but what would be your recommendation for someone who is just a beginner and want to dive into this technology but doesn't want necessarily from the start like to spin up their own Kubernetes cluster and so on? Is there an easy way like a sandbox where one can try it out without much of a hustle?
There are a lot of ways to run Kubernetes cluster easily. One is the Minikube, obviously. Minikube, I have Minikube installed. So installing Minikube might be a little tricky because you might run into a few issues. I've seen people complaining about that. But there is Play with Kubernetes online platform. So Cubescape works with any of these clusters. So there are a few tools, which have certain limitations. Maybe they don't work with the local clusters. They need to be deployed in cloud and have the networking configuration, all of that. There are a few tools which expect that, but Kubescape ideally works on any kind of cluster, even if it is kind that is Kubernetes in Docker. uh, it works on any kind of Kubernetes cluster. So as long as you're able to spin up an Kubernetes cluster either locally, or there are a lot of this Code Cloud, not Code Cloud, sorry, not really.
Katakoda
Sorry.
or Code Cloud, Katakoda? There are different systems,
Yeah,
right?
Katakoda. Yes,
Yeah.
Katakoda was the one I was looking for. Yes, so Katakoda, there are different, easy to spin up clusters that are present in Katacoda, although those are for specific scenarios, it will still provide you a cluster. So you can use that cluster as well, and then deploy certain workloads and see how where the security of that particular workload or cluster looks like. So there are a lot of things that you can explore with this,
Okay,
all
cool,
of
cool.
them being completely free.
That's not amazing. Are there any certifications for this particular technology, or is it too young for it?
Yeah, it is too young, I believe. I'm not sure if it is even a year old. But look at the number of features. That's pretty great with the team that they have at Atmosec. Although completely open source with respect to the Cubescape
Mhm.
CLI and then all of that.
Okay, that's amazing. So we are running out of time for today for this session. Thanks, Avinash, for a great session. You are available for further questions in our Discord, I guess, right?
Yes, I'm also on the Slack, or
Okay.
ping me on Twitter. Anywhere works.
Oh, that's amazing. So if anyone who is watching it afterwards has any questions whatsoever, feel free to join any of our chat spaces of the Cloud Stud Network and
Yes.
get the conversation going about this technology. Thanks, Avinash, a lot. Have a great time, and wishing to stay safe to everyone else in our community. And see you next time, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for joining, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye.